Hello and welcome to this, our very first attempt at a remote Trader Talk TV. My name is Lindsay Roundtree and I'm delighted to be joined by Anna Schenk, who is European EMEA MD of Semasio. Hello, Anna.
Hi.
Lovely to have you here. Let's kick off.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. I say have you here, I mean remotely, of
Virtually.
course. Let's see how we go anyway. It's our first time, we'll see how we go. So it's great to have you. Let's start with you giving us a brief overview of what Semasio is and what you guys do.
Yes. So Semasio is the first provider to offer what we call unified semantic targeting with our products, 3 products: audience targeting, contextual targeting, and brand fit targeting. That's how we call brand safety, but we will get to that later. So what we see at the moment in the market is an unsure or unsecure future of targeting and third-party data, especially because on the one hand, the third-party cookie becoming more and more under pressure. Google wants to disallow it. Other browsers already did it. And at the same time, privacy regulations kicking in with, for example, GDPR or CCPA. So in that actual situation, we see contextual targeting getting a renaissance, so becoming suddenly very, very important again, like it was when I was a media planner, for example, 10 years ago. But what we also see is that people are becoming afraid that we will roll back now 10 or 15 years ago, so to the old way of planning media, the way it was when we looked at environments and placements. And we don't believe it has to be like this. The way we treat things and the way we do it, for us, contextual targeting and audience targeting is just 2 sides to the same coin. And that's what I like to talk about today.
Interesting. So you mentioned about the concern, particularly for media planners, about potentially having to roll back 10, 15 years to the way things used to be. There are some schools of thought out there that could be what we need in the industry to actually almost have a reset. Why do you think that is not the way to go? And actually there are solutions that exist today that can help us carry on without worrying about what GDPR, CCPA and the denigration of the third-party cookie could mean for our industry?
Yes. So first of all, I always question myself, why is it at all a bad thing? I mean, rolling back, I totally get that that's a bad thing. We don't want to go in also in technology back in 10 years. But why did we do contextual or environmental planning? Because we did do it because we didn't have that much other solutions and possibilities out there. But we also did do it because it worked. If I was working, for example, for a travel provider, of course, when I was placing ads on certain travel environment where people are very close to buy a flight right now, of course, that performs and works way better than targeting people who generally have an interest in flights, right? So that is the first thing I always question. And my opinion from the get-go was contextual targeting was nothing bad. So it doesn't mean roll back into bad times. It means, and that's also how we treat it, it is just an additional solution, additional targeting strategy that works as good, or can work as good as audience targeting for the different types of campaign and campaign goals that you have. So that's why, first of all, I think it's not a rollback. Also, I think that technologies developed over the last years, right? So, and that's also what we talk about later when I start drawing. It's also about what possibilities do we have to identify what a certain content or text is about. And it's not that simple as it was 10 years ago, where we started to categorize certain things into boxes. And then we had to make a decision, is that automotive content now, or is it family and parenting content? So we can really dig into what a certain text and content is about, and therefore making contextual targeting, but also audience targeting, by the way, way more advanced.
This seems like a really good opportunity for us to start you mapping that out.
Yes.
Looks like. So when we want, it feels like the term context comes with it with a lot of kind of eye rolls from the industry, because they do think of context 10 to 15 years ago and what that meant then. And context today does look very, very different, as you yourself just said. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to start mapping out, what does context look like? How does Semasio fit into how you are helping publishers kind of and advertisers make the most of this contextual opportunity that exists?
Yes. And also what I think is very important from our perspective, and that's what we go into now, is, as I said earlier, it is for us contextual, but as well as audience, because the way we look at audience, we learn from their behavior, right? So we also need to know what they look at. So that is why we treat it as I said earlier, as the same thing, just two different options to it, right? And that of course also offers a very new positioning and possibilities for contextual targeting. But let's have a look. The basis for all of what we do is to understanding a page and the content that's on the page. So what we first of all do for that is we eliminate what we call the noise. So everything that's not editorial content, which is an ad or a navigation, and we really focus on the editorial content, the pure text of a certain web page. What we then do is we extract the most significant words and phrases that describe that text and explain what that text differentiates from any other text out there. That is what we call the semantic page profile. You can imagine that as a big weighted keyword cloud with the most relevant words and word combinations of that page, right? And the beauty of it is constantly updating. So the more text we see and the more words in a certain language we read, the more it updates itself, and the more also the relevance of certain words change, right? So I think a good example at the moment is Corona. As Corona popped up in the first text, we of course experience this as something new and also as something potentially significant because it was not out there a lot. But it only took us a couple of days to realize Corona is everywhere. The keyword itself, it's everywhere. It is in every text. So suddenly it doesn't become something that potentially makes a certain text outstanding to another text, because very simplified speaking, it is everywhere. And so you can really see that what we call semantic page profile as a constant update and living things, and that also readjusts or recalibrate itself with the more words and text it can read, because that also means significance of certain words and word combinations change. So let's then assume a user goes and visits that page. It's unfortunately very hard to draw on that whiteboard, but I hope it looks pretty okay. So now
it looks great.
Okay, so now a user goes and visits the page. What we then do is we enrich his user profile. We call it the semantic user profile, with the words and phrases that are significant on the page the user has consumed. So we start building a semantic user profile that feeds itself with the keywords that are relevant of the page. So let's now assume the user goes and looks at the next page, right? We again do our trick. We semantically analyze the content. We extract the relevant words and phrases of that content. And we also enrich that into the user's profile. So the same like the page profile, the user's profile is something that lives as well constantly. The more pages the user consumes, the more often we see the user, the more keywords, weighted keywords we feed into his profile. And of course, we also constantly keep it actual and updated. And this is what we call the semantic profiling approach to pages and users. And back to what I said earlier, two sides to the same coin, right? So we understand both of them based on the terms that they contain as a page and consume as a user. And that is a foundation for whatever we do and whatever we offer to our clients in terms of targeting. So let's now look at how that works in practice. Let's assume a client of ours either works fully in self-service with our UI, self-service UI, or he works with us in managed service where we run and maintain the segments, the targets for him. So it always, first of all, starts out with what we call a target description, right? So we get a brief from a client, or a client, which is an agency, gets a brief from the advertiser where a certain target audience or target group is described. It comes potentially also with a campaign goal. And that is where it starts to feed into our system, and where we try to use different types of input to turn that target description into a Semasio target definition. And the input can be very different, right? It can, of course, first of all, be seed data that can come like first-party data from advertiser sites directly, or from a panel where you did a special survey for a certain topic and you feed it into our system so that we can use it for learning. But it can also be keywords or word examples that very well describe what you want to achieve or what you want to reach in positive terms, but also negative terms. And we can also use URLs or pages or sites that are very good examples of something that you want to achieve, right? For example, you have the perfect cat page that you can take, because you say people who go on that page, that are for sure people who have cats, right? And of course, you can combine any of these inputs with and or to make it a very, very more complex target definition. So let's maybe look at it based on a concrete example. I think streaming services are at the moment very popular because everyone sits at home and wants to watch his favorite TV show. So let's assume an advertiser that has a streaming services comes to us and wants to target users who have an interest in streaming services right now. So one thing we could do there is we could start out with putting some keywords around that topic, like streaming services, online streaming, potentially even some brand names of competitors. But we could also put negative keywords that show something we want to avoid, like illegal streaming, right? Because that's rather what we don't want to go for. So we input these keywords into our system. And what then happens is that the system shows more keywords that appear around the keywords or the word combinations we looked for as relevant keywords. So you can really imagine it as a big weighted keyword cloud with the keywords you looked for and the ones that appear around it. And now you have the possibility, either in self-service or we do it for you in managed service, to fine-tune your target definition, to really put it the way you want it. Like, as I said earlier, illegal streaming, that's not what we wanted to look for, right? These are not the people we want. We want the people that look into streaming right now that maybe have problems not finding their TV show with the streaming service they have. So we can dice and twice the keyword cloud by adding more words to it or removing more words until we have the ideal definition or description of the interest in streaming that you wanted to achieve.
That's a very interesting example. And I'm interested, given that we are having this discussion in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, and obviously you mentioned Corona earlier, I'm interested in how this works in theory when it comes to something like coronavirus and building up the profile of a user, of a person, by looking at the kind of content, and you talk about contextual and semantics, looking at the content they're consuming, which if you look at most publisher sites at the moment, particularly the kind of premium publishers, is probably going to be rather coronavirus related, because that's a lot of the news they're consuming is likely going to like weigh in heavily on that topic. If those keywords are then being added into their profile as something of interest to them, and then that's then being looked at as a blocked keyword because there are many advertisers that don't want to appear against that keyword, does that then cause limitations in some way? So if you've got someone's interested in that kind of topic, but then it's being blocked as it is by many advertisers because they're worried about their brand appearing against the term coronavirus, how does that play? How would that work in that kind of scenario?
Yeah, so we would treat it in two different ways. So first of all, as how I have also drawn it earlier, we look at in the main instance at the most significant words and phrases of a page. And if coronavirus or any words around it appear everywhere, it's nothing outstanding for us any longer. So we would only really make it as something outstanding in the page if it's very frequently appearing and consumed, right? So it will naturally, let's call it like this, disappear in most of the content and not over-represented in the content itself, right? That is the one thing. But of course, on the other hand, if you might now want to avoid Corona content, right? Because you don't want to be present there, we can also allow to do that, because whenever it goes into the brand safety direction, and we will go see that later, we're not focusing on the relevant words only, otherwise we would get into problems, right? So we can really ensure that if you want it, we can exclude a certain keyword as soon as it appears anywhere on the page, and it has nothing to do with its relevance.
Okay, interesting. That makes sense. And where are we at in terms of what you've drawn so far? Is there more things that are we at a stage where we can add more to it? I'm just looking at your drawing right now in front of me.
Yes.
So we want to talk about how we're looking at the contextual side of things versus the audience targeting side of things.
Yes.
That would be
exactly.
To move on to next.
Yes, exactly. So let's maybe go back to the drawing then.
Great.
What we've done now in the first instance is we have set our target definition, right? Nothing else. We haven't decided what we want to do, what we want to turn it into. We've only defined how a certain topic ideally looks for us. In our example, it was the streaming, right? That's as much as we have done. And now we go into the next step, and also back to your question. And that would be to decide what you want to turn it into, what you want to use it for. And that now we are also back into what we call the unified targeting strategy. Because with that one definition of streaming, the one topic, we also like to call it a semantic topic of streaming, you can either turn it into targeting users, targeting pages, or avoid certain pages, I call it exclude pages, right? Or any of the combinations. So you do not need to, back to the intro, decide between contextual and audience. You can do both at once and seamlessly extend one with the other. So when we talk about targeting users, that's what we call audience targeting. And we could say, to stick with our streaming example again, we could say that you could target the users who have been in touch with the keywords around streaming in the last couple of X days that you can define. But you can also say that you want to find similar users to these ones. So we do a lookalike modeling on the users. We call it an extended audience or an audience extension. When you decide to target pages, that's when we are in the contextual targeting bucket, right? And here what you can then do is you target the pages that are alike the topic of streaming that you have defined. And the beauty here is, again, like the cycle that I've drawn in the beginning, that everything, the audience targeting as well as the contextual targeting, constantly updates itself on a real-time or daily basis, so that you always have a fresh, up-to-date target, and that you don't target people who potentially have had an interest 3 weeks ago, right? It is constantly and daily updated. And as we are looking at it from the page and the user profiles, it also allows for a product variation of the two of it. So I like to align it here, that we call cookieless audience extension, right? So as we originated in the audience targeting world, let's assume we've built an audience targeting based on a seed audience that we've gotten from the advertiser because he had a pixel on his sign-up page, and we can track all the users who have really signed up for the streaming service. We need 300 of these users. Then we can look at what they have semantically in common that differentiates them from all the other users to find alike profiles. But what we can do at the same time is we can find pages and sites these users are more likely to be found or overrepresented, right? And that is what we call the cookieless audience extension. So we're coming from an audience as a basis and we're turning it contextually. We're allowing you to target an audience based on the content they are overrepresented on. And you can imagine it like a little graph that you then can see that has reach and overrepresentation index, and you can choose the trade-off between reach and overrepresentation index. So you want to only hit pages where 5 times as much users in that target group can be found than average in that page. That is where you have to set your trade-off, right? And that is then turned into the contextual world. And that's also what we talked about earlier, why we don't believe it's going back 10 years. It is now really using the actual situation and the possibilities we have on audience targeting and turning that contextually. So making contextual targeting also something else than simply you looking for travel, you want to sell travel, go on travel content, right? That is what we've done back then. Now we're making it more intelligent, learning from users' behavior and turning that into the contextual world. And that will also potentially work when we can only identify X% of the population any longer because of third-party cookie limitations and also because of non-given concept, for example. We can still learn from that proportion of the population we know and extend the reach by going contextually. And we like to visualize it also with a little slider where you could say you have context and audience on each side. And you can choose your trade-off between how much of the target group you want to target through their profile and how much you want to fill that up contextually.
Interesting. So it's very much looking at a hybrid approach, but being able to do so without the reliance on the third-party cookie.
Yes.
Right.
Well, Yeah, I mean, I think the whole third-party cookie is of course a topic in itself. If we still want to be able to target users based on their profile, we have to be able to identify them, right? If that's not a third-party cookie any longer in future, it is a unified ID solution, for example, or more unified ID solution. So we still have to have the possibility to identify user, to link him to surfing behavior, but we will for sure not be able to do that for all users any longer, because of course privacy regulations come in at the same time, and not every user, even though we can still identify him, might give us consent to do so, right? And that is where that approach, as you also said, feeds in very well, because you can extend your reach to one side or the other, and basically choose, we also like to call it, from our toolbox, right? To choose a solution from our toolbox that fulfills your campaign needs, and at the same time allows you to survive, is a very negative word, right? But to still target in the actual or future situation of the market.
That makes sense. And so going back to the smiley face with the hat that you've been drawing for us so far, what is the next? So you've identified your audience, or you've identified the pages that you want to be able to target your audience on. What then is the next stage of completing that cycle?
Yes. So now let's stick with our streaming example. So we now have the perfect target definition. Let's assume we decided to turn it into both. We build an audience targeting and a contextual targeting at the same time. But maybe, because that's what we haven't talked about it now as well, we also want to exclude certain pages. That's what we call brand fit targeting. It is not the typical brand safety approach, because we believe that there is already enough very good providers out there in the market offering brand safety. It is rather something more individual or customized that goes into the brand suitability direction, right? So with that approach, we can ensure that a certain brand or brand message is not appearing negative, given it sits in a certain context. To maybe stick with our streaming example, we could say that you might want to avoid content where streaming is mentioned in a negative sense, because it is illegal, right? I don't know, people talk about illegal streaming possibilities, or even some law cases, stuff like that. That is maybe where you don't want to be, because then your message that you talk about right now is perceived negatively, potentially, from the user that's talked. And that's what you can do with our very special and customized brand fit approach, to exclude exactly context that you want to avoid, because it is negatively perceived with the message you want to talk about. So back to your question earlier. Now we decided what solution from the toolbox we want to pick. So the next thing that we then do is we can activate the targets that we chosen into either a DSP or a DMP of your choice. We're working with the main biggest DMPs and also DSPs, and also some DSPs, and we have very good match rates in both sides, audience and contextual targeting. So the choice is yours where you want to activate, and then with one push, and depending on how we are integrated with one of our partners, you have to wait a night, but then you can go into your DSP and activate your segment. And let's assume now that you've chosen a unified targeting strategy where you want to target audiences and fill reach up with contextual targeting. You could, for example, say that you take a campaign with 2 line items where you put contextual targeting on one and audience targeting on the other. And then you can ensure that you exclude the audience targeting on the contextual line item, so that you can really fill up reach only when you're not able to reach the user through his cookie profile. It works very well. We've even tried it with our own Semasio campaigns.
Interesting.
Yes. Yeah, well, you always have to prove your own concepts, right?
Absolutely.
And as you also seen, we like cycles. One very important step in the whole process for us is insights and optimization, right? Because we also know that third-party data has a very bad reputation, and it's quite often perceived as negatively not working. And the reason for that is we don't want to talk about all of them now, but quite often you just pick the second next best that doesn't really work for your campaign goals. So it can only long-term work if you constantly check your results, see does what you have built here at all work with your campaign goal, right? So if we, for example, have targeted lookalikes from the streaming interest that we have identified, we have to see that they are potential new customers, potentially interested. So if we, for example, would like to convert them with a last click model, we would have a hard time. And that's something we have to consider and we have to learn. So we can go in, we look at insights that our system offers, and we can then readjust, right? So looking back at the slider here, we can say, oh, it was not good enough. So maybe I have to put the slider here, right? And I have to get a higher index. I get less reach, but therefore more performance. So I constantly can readjust my targeting definition up here, but also the toolbox to sharpen or sharpen affinity or decrease reach. That's what I constantly have to ensure to really get it working. And that's a very big learning of ours, and that we also like to pray out to our clients that it's not always one thing working. It's a constant, and that's why we like to draw it as a cycle, a constant cycle that we have to go and change the input up here, adjust the target definition, play around with the solutions that we have down here, and then gain insights again and do it all over again.
So I'd like to start by asking how an advertiser would get started with this. So obviously advertisers have a wealth of keywords and URL data at their disposal already. Is it a situation where they could just go, here's my URL whitelist I want to use. Mm-hmm. Here are the keywords I use at the moment across other channels, or how I identify my audience so far. I could just give them to you. Here you go. Now work out for me where my index should lie based on what you draw.
Yes, that is one solution. So basically, we have 3 levels of service, as we can call it. So first of all, we have the so-called Semasio classic audience and contextual segments that we have as always on segments available in the different DSPs that everyone can go in like a supermarket and just buy it off the shelf right now, right? So it's basically good point to get started, to see that we are there, that we offer something. But as I also said earlier, most likely people don't know what's really behind it, so they might pick the second next best. It's not working. Third-party data is bad, right? So that's why the next service level that we offer is what we call managed service, and that would work exactly like you said. So an advertiser or an agency would come to us, would give us the target description, as we also talked about earlier, and also give us some more insight. Like you said, for example, this is my keywords I also use for other stuff. This is pages I know that are excellent as example pages. That's everything we can work and use as input to then turn it into a target definition, and then together with the client, and that's very important for us, decide on the different tools to choose from our toolbox. Because even in a managed service, we try to be as transparent as we can and share as much information as we can as the client wants to have. And if he wants, he can trade off itself with that curve and say, here's where I want to set the threshold. If he doesn't, we can do it for him. And then the third level that we're working in is a self-service level, where our clients go fully hands-on keyword. We have a self-service UI where you can go in and basically do the whole process that we've just talked about completely on your own, from inputting your keywords and example URLs, but also your first-party seed data from your advertiser, to turning it into the different solutions and then clicking yourself the push button so that you can find it in the DSP later.
Interesting. And do you find that what you're trying to explain to your potential clients and your existing clients is something that they're talking about context and semantics shouldn't be particularly new to them, but in this new world, if you like, where there is so much uncertainty around GDPR and CCPA compliance and other data regulation laws throughout the world, as well as the denigration of third-party cookie over the coming years, is there a lot of education before you even get started on helping them understand what they can do with Semasio, actually understanding where the world currently sits and how they can take advantage of that? Is there a lot of that going on?
It is. At the moment, I find it very interesting because I see 2 different things going on. I see that the people that are just and that increased from our perception, that are coming like, I want audiences now. give me as much as you can. Let's just go with it, right? That is one thing we see. And then they at the same time, contextual, let's try it as well. Sounds good. And then, of course, there's that other part of people that goes into the direction more that you said, that are faced with the uncertainty of the market. They don't know how the future will look like, and they start looking into different solutions, possibilities, and that's where all the education happens. And I have to say that even right now, where everyone sits at home in home office, I realized it more in the 1.5 last weeks, that more and more people even seem to have time to think further, right? So they now sitting there at home, maybe they get bored in a certain sense. So they start thinking even more into the future and coming up with some new scenarios and ask us if we can be part of it, if we can help in that scenarios. And that is, of course, where our job is also a lot of recommendation, education, and also consulting at the same time.
That's great for everyone, actually. It's a great point to make, that actually this whole working from home environment we've been forced into is giving people more headspace. They're not so concerned about getting to work and getting tasks done. They've got time to think about new ways of strategizing their campaigns, which is fascinating.
Yeah. Yes.
Brilliant. Well, I think it's a good opportunity to leave it there. I want to say thank you so much for joining me today, Anna. And that has been Trader Talk TV.